recess. I'd like to thank Senator Lujan, Senator Fisher, Senator Nicholas, and Senator Paris for being on time. Unfortunately, that's not enough for quorum, so we're going to take a short recess and wait for the others to come in. Thank you.
Committee of the Whole is called back to order. My colleagues, we are on Chapter 11. Let me give you fair warning. We're now opening Chapter 11. If you have any amendments that are in and you plan on replacing it, understand that you go to the bottom of the list. You don't stay at the same wherever you were at. You go to the bottom of the list. And once we start with the first amendment, any new amendments, forget it. I'm going to rule it out of order, so just be ready for that. Okay? Now we're going to start with the first amendment. Or if she colleagues, we're going to take another 10 more minutes because they're still setting up all the amendments that are flowing in, and we get them in the right order. Okay? Thank you. Back to recess. The Committee of the Whole is now called to order. My colleagues, I really hope you have a fresh set of amendments. How many total amendments? 20. There's a total of 20 amendments for this chapter. And it all looks like they're all on one page. But that being said, they're all in 113, 114. Nothing is in the beginning? Anything in the beginning, so I can start closing this part. Start closing these pages. Most of the pages are 114 and 113. Oh, wait a minute. What is this?
That's Senator Shelton, that's
Oh, 113.
That's what, but she's at the end because your mic is on.
Yeah, but 113, 114. Okay, my colleagues. The first page, or all the amendments either on page 113 or 114. So at this point, I'm going to start closing the other pages from page 107 and work my way down to the first amendment. And the only reason for that is because we don't need it no more. It's closed. It's good. Okay? So at this point, page 107, there's no amendments. Page 107, okay? We're going to close that page. Hopefully no objection. Page 107 is now closed. Page 108. Please, my colleagues, take a look. 108. 108 is closed. We're on page 109. Page 109. That's closed. Page 110. No comment, nothing. Closed. 111. We're at 111. We'll now close page 111. Okay? The amendments are on 113 and 114. Okay, that's closed. We're on page 112. 112. No amendments. That page is closed. Oh, Madam Speaker, you have comments for 112? Okay.
Oh, no, next section, next.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and close page 112. At this point, I will not close any any more pages now because why? The first amendment is page 114, but there are amendments for 113. But we're entertaining amendments first come, will be first entertained. Okay? Are we good? Unfortunately, it will be because that's how the amendments were submitted. I would love to do 113 first and move on, but based on the order, we'll do a 114. The first amendment, out of the 20 pages, is from Senator Sabina Perez. Your amendment is to add a new section to Chapter 11 of Bill to read...
Mr. Chair.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, to interrupt. You know, since there is only one amendment on page 113,
It doesn't matter. We're still going to go by in sequence, and we'll just see what the impact's going to be. I understand where you're coming from, but we'll just go down the line. Okay? Okay, so we're Senator Perez?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is this the tobacco one or is this the literacy?
That's the Supplemental Tobacco, Nicotine Control and Prevention. Okay?
Before I proffer my amendment, I just have a question for OFB. So there is choices as far as where to get the funding from. And so, Steve, if you can talk about the choice of excess revenue versus audited surplus, can you define or distinguish between the use of those terms?
To answer your questions, Senator, like I said before, during the course of the year, the fiscal year, as we go month to month and the government collects its revenues, we like to use the word excess to anything that the government collects over and above what the monthly projected revenue forecast is. And then we total that up to the month that we're in. So like if we're in December, we'll calculate the first 3 months of the fiscal year, total what the projected revenues we're going to collect for that period of time. Anything over that we refer to as excess. Now in terms of surplus, I use the word surplus at the end of the fiscal year when the audit is done. And that is when we can actually recognize the true surplus of what the government of Guam has generated over the last fiscal year. And that is normally reflected in the government of Guam annual audit.
And so if I choose the surplus revenues, then it won't be available till the end, almost the end of the fiscal year. Like right now we're waiting on the audit for 22. Is that correct?
Yeah, we are pending. I guess everybody in the government of Guam is pending the delivery of that final audit by the OPA. It has not been given out and handed out. So again, the only thing we can refer to at this point is the CER report that we have for FY22. So again, I would, like I've said before, whatever that amount is, whatever that excess amount is that's reflecting the September CER report, is the amount that we all have been utilizing throughout the fiscal year to get where we are today. Once the audit is finally out, it will determine exactly how much revenues the government of Guam actually collected over its projected amount.
Okay, so, in the past budget, we did put in language as far as excess revenues. Were those, how can the agencies be assured that they were actually getting the money? So was it up to the agency to go to OFB and say, okay, we, in the budget bill, this was supposed to be, due to us, but, I guess, has anybody ever followed up to make sure that the excess was provided?
That would be correct, Senator, if the total appropriations made by the legislature also received the same corresponding revenue levels collected above the FY22 or 23, whichever one we're using. In terms of priority, which ones gets funded, I'm sure all of them will, as long as we collect up to the level to cover those appropriations. In the event the collection is insufficient, and it's not up to par to cover all the appropriations, then I don't think there's any sequence as to how these appropriations are going to be funded. They can say, well, maybe when the bills were passed and became law, maybe you can use that as a sequence. Who gets funded first? That could be a possibility. But I'm not too sure that whether or not the administration is going to follow that, because in their eyes, any bills that come into law are law, regardless of when they're passed. So it's really up to, I guess, the administration to fund whatever appropriations they feel at the time, or if sufficient funds are available, they will fund.
Okay. Another question. So the interest, how do we know how much interest has been received from the funds? Is there any way of knowing what the interest has accrued regarding all the federal funds that are coming in? Do we have information on that?
No, I don't, Senator, but I do know, I mean, even my time at the Bureau of Budget, I know that all revenues deposited into any government of Guam revenue funds are interest-bearing accounts. It just depends what type of account and how these accounts are set up. But for the most part, I believe general fund is an interest-bearing account simply because of the amount of the fund the amount of the funds in the account. But most accounts, like for example, like Section 30, as we spoke earlier, although those monies are received in the month of September, they're already allocated for the whole year. So you're not going to put it in an annual interest-bearing account simply because the money won't be there within a year. It'll be all expended. But you can start drawing down from those monies, and whether or not those monies are able to draw interest on the short time they're in their account, there is a possibility, yes. And I do know, at least for all the other revenue accounts that the government of Guam does receive, whether it be general fund, special fund, or federal grants, they are deposited into various accounts. Whether or not, and I know, which at least for some certainty, they do draw interest. Where these interest amounts are deposited, I'm not too sure where. We do have a revenue category in the revenue statements that shows interest and penalties. That be the account that these interest-bearing accounts are being deposited into.
Yeah, I think it'd be good to have that information. You know, maybe that's a request from me if OFB can determine that amount. But in any case, thank you for that. So the amendment that I'd like to proffer is to add a new section, Chapter 11 of the bill, to read section Supplemental Tobacco Nicotine Control Prevention. The sum of $500,000 shall be appropriated to Department of Public Health and Social Services, Division of Public Health, Bureau of Non-Communicable Diseases, and $100,000 to the Guam Behavioral Health and Wellness Peace Prevention and Training Branch from excess general fund revenues for fiscal year 2023 for the purpose of tobacco nicotine compliance prevention.
Senator Paris, if you could pause. I'm looking at, you have two amendments. One does not strike out and identify what you just read. So are you disposing of the first amendment? Because the first amendment did not strike anything.
Okay,
So you have to dispose of one before we can go to the next one.
Okay, so should I proffer that amendment and then withdraw?
Okay, so you know what? We're going to accept this one, and then you can, they're both right next to each other, and then you can identify it to just withdraw the other one then after, right?
Okay.
Or whatever you decide on what direction to go.
I appreciate that.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, yeah, so the amendment that I would like to proffer is the one with excess general fund revenues. First,
Yes,
for fiscal year.
it's striking the word unappropriate actual and putting the word excess general fund, correct?
Yeah. So
Okay.
do I need,
Do you want to
can I
speak?
just proffer it without the,
No, we'll just
striking?
continue on with it.
okay. Yeah, so, you know, I did proffer this amendment early on, and the reasons are the same. You know, Guam has a vaping problem amongst our youth. In fact, we're #1 in the world, unfortunately. Our tobacco use is increasing, unlike the continental U.S. And so this is a huge concern, and we all know prevention is a big part to help stem this epidemic that's appearing in our community today. And I think what's needed is a commensurate response to address this. Of course, the amendment I have today is very modest, but it would definitely help the capacity building within the agencies that are monitoring and providing interventions for youth that are addicted to nicotine. Unfortunately, vape is the choice of delivery amongst our youth, and many teachers that I've talked to, you know, administrators, are concerned because these devices are very well hidden, and it's very difficult to detect use even within the school system. And so we really need to beef up our capacity to, I think prevention is really the key to this, to prevent the start of this habit, which is a lifelong habit for many of us that have become addicted to nicotine. And nicotine kills, right? It kills, it's a cause of the leading causes of disease here on island. So it causes heart disease, you know, leads to other health effects, cancer, which is high on Guam. And I think this is an investment into our community that's well needed, much needed. And I ask for my colleagues' support. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Paris. Comments? Senator Fisher, you're first on.
Yes, thank you very much. I sit in support of this particular amendment. Anything we can do to destroy, frankly, the vaping industry on this island would be a welcome step forward, and this amount of money may help push it, because as my friend, the good senator just said, it's #1 problem on island. It's killing us. And, you know, that's one of the reasons I've noticed that even people in this legislature who consume tobacco products never do that within 20 feet of any door. So I really appreciate that. So, I mean, there's kind of a universal recognition of the danger of these products. So I definitely rise in support of it. And, Mr. Chair, can I ask a question of OFB?
Please state your question.
My question is, if it's excess general fund revenues of fiscal year 2023, we won't know what those revenues are until there's an audit of 2023, is that correct?
Your assertion is correct, Senator, yes.
Okay, so if we do the audit of 2023, but it is not finished by the end of fiscal year 2024,
Point of information, actually, I know where he's going on this, if you don't mind. The audit is required to be completed by June of next year, 2024. So we won't know that. I mean, we've experienced right now, Mr. Chair, that we couldn't even get an audit in June of this year for the FY22 audit report. So now we would have to wait until June of 2024.
Thank you, sir. And just, I guess, to follow up on that, so if the audit is, it sounds like the audit for 22 is untimely. We haven't seen it yet. If the audit for fiscal year 23 is untimely and runs out the fiscal year, does that mean that that money will never be given to public health?
That's correct, because the audit is not done.
Well, okay, that answers my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Tello?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, just to tag on to that, technically, you know, and Senator Fisher got that right. You know, it won't be a reality. It may not even be a reality. And I call it what I call ghost money, or, you know, fanfare money, if you ask me, because here we are appropriating for something as important as this. You know, the subject matter, all of us agree that there is an issue on this island, you know, with tobacco. We've had that since 1940, and we've done our thing on raising taxes for tobacco, and that seemed to hinder it. You know, nothing stops us from raising taxes on vaping as well, because we haven't done that yet. I know Senator Snodstein may be looking into that one as well. So, I mean, we can sit here and talk about every issue that we have, everything from not enough money to the Cancer Care Foundation. We can talk about not enough money for, we were talking about parks and rec, and give the saddest story we can all hear. But the reality is we have to be fiscally responsible with the people's money, and we cannot say that we're going to fund something when it's ghost money, when the money is not there. It brings false hope to our people to do that. I mean, if anything, I would not object to requiring public health to allocate, you know, this money directly for the prevention of nicotine, tobacco and nicotine, to allocate, where they're forced to put money into this. That has a better chance than giving excess revenue that we don't know what it will be. We're all crossing our fingers that the FY22 is not going to be in a deficit, or even FY23, because that's the biggest problem, is our FY23 budget. We're already seeing we're over appropriated funding. $50 million, my friends, was authorized to the governor to utilize. And if you don't know by now, when you're doing an authorization for a governor to go into a general fund and take whatever money's there, that could include excess revenue. That sure can. And how many bills have passed that we've said the governor has the authority to use general fund money? And that was the end of that. Well, That means she can go in there and just raid the whole account. Exactly, she can take it all, Senator Fisher, you're right. So if we're going to sit here and provide funding for something as important as this or anything else moving forward, it should be real tangible money. You know, I totally respect the author of this amendment. You know, her and I agree on many things. But when it comes to finance, I think we need to be more fiscally responsible. It is the taxpayers' money, so I have to respectfully object.
Thank you. Does anyone like to speak to this amendment? We do have, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The amendment is asking for $100,000 from unappropriated actual general fund revenues of fiscal year 2023. It means
No, it's excess, not
whatever's not
unappropriated.
appropriated, that's what she wants to use. It's not phantom unless we think they're lying in their reports to us. And if we don't appropriate it, then that's exactly when the governor is going to get to use it in whatever way she wants. So they just sent us a report for July yesterday, or I guess it covers the month of June. No, sorry, it covers the month of July. So up to July 20, or July, the end of July, they're reporting the net unobligated projected general fund revenue is $15 million. It's already August. The fiscal year ends at the end of September. So again, it's very hard that this is not going to be accurate for us if they're telling the truth. We've forced them to account for all appropriations from excess 23 revenues, which we have used for the LEAP. I think all my colleagues supported that. We used it for the GPA credit. We used it for DOE. We used it for the GPP, which are the pay raises. We used it for other things. We used it to increase the rainy day fund, in fact. So, again, they're predicting how much is going to be left. They have accounted for all of the appropriations we've made. So according to our appropriations, there should be this money left. Unless they've spent it on some other things that they have not accounted for, then we should force them to account for that. And we will do that by using this money instead of leaving it there for them to use however they want. We put it exactly where we want, and this is only $100,000. So I don't think it's going to have any negative impact on anyone when they're predicting $15 million, that we use $100,000 for this purpose, for tobacco and nicotine compliance. And excess 23 revenue, this is the time. It's almost the end of August. It's almost the end of the fiscal year. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Senator Brown, is there anyone else like to speak after Senator Brown? I guess no one else, Senator Brown.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. You know, I don't object to the purpose of the money. I think it's very laudable that our colleague, you know, certainly has recognized a growing problem that we have on Guam, and one that ultimately will continue to affect the health and welfare of our community. And yes, there have been all kinds of interesting appropriations. You know, I kind of feel like I've stepped out of a time warp. Because back in the day, they just simply appropriated from the general fund whether it existed or not. And that's the whole reason why fiscal notes have been required to be attached to any appropriations. So we actually have some sense of what we think is reality with regards to whether or not the money actually exists. Because we simply used to throw it over to the governor, whoever the governor was, and said, oh, we'll leave the governor to decide whether he, at the time, you know, is going to fund it or not. If they don't, we can blame the governor for not funding it because, look, the legislature, we're so caring, we're so loving, please vote for us. We appropriated it, and that was the process. And now coming back after, you know, 14 plus years, Now we have all this interesting language. Now it's unappropriated actual general fund revenues. As I mentioned previously, I don't know why we go through the whole process at the very beginning of the budget to determine what we believe. Again, we understand these are all just, we're speculating as best we can with our previous revenues, what actual amount we will have to appropriate. And we go through that whole exercise, and then after we appropriate all that, and then we're looking everywhere else, anything else, whether it's audited, unaudited, most especially when it's unaudited, then we want to appropriate everything under the sun. And that's where the concern is. I think we have to have some sense of fiscal responsibility. When the money's there and tangible, then I'm like, okay, it's real. It's like going into my bank account trying to explain to my bank, I've only got, $100, but I really have 1,000. Because I believe I'm going to get 1,000, and can I write checks in advance of that because I really believe I'm going to get 1,000? I think they'll come looking for me at some point. I just think we have to have some sense of order. Budgeting for the government of Guam to me is not that complicated. It's no different than budgeting in our own personal finances. I can spend money that I have, and if I don't have it, I don't have it. I can say, well, in the future I'm going to get it. Well, then maybe in the future when I get it, I can actually spend it. But this kind of language now, this constant sense of we are going to drain every single penny, whether it's real or not, whether it's tangible or not, to me is not being responsible, and it's not being as real with regards to where we're at. Because, Mr. Chairman, I could be wrong. God knows, I don't have an answer for everything. But I'm very, very concerned about where we're heading, where we're going to be 12 months from now. This magic of revenues ain't because of our greatness. Thank you, Uncle Sam. But, Uncle Sam ain't rolling the dough out. Uncle Sam's got other places in the nation to spend the money that he needs to for other recovery areas. And I see that money running down. And I see a lot of long-term obligations that have been approved by this body. Many I've never supported. So I just think we need to be mindful. I think to continue to go down this road, we're not being fiscally responsible. So with that, I'm not going to vote for the amendment, but I definitely have a valid funding source that was a direct appropriation from the general fund that was included in the revenues. I'd have no issue with it. Thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Senator Barnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Steve, if you don't mind, could you explain unappropriated actual general fund revenues of fiscal year 2023? Oh, wait, sorry, I'm sorry, so many amendments. Could you explain excess general fund revenues of fiscal year 2023? Thank you.
Absolutely, Senator. Okay, I'm trying to make this easy as possible.
I appreciate that.
Okay. Excess revenue as we realize it in the government of Guam is that during the course of the fiscal year, every month the government of Guam collects X amount of dollars we consider as revenues. Those revenues are pegged against the total appropriation that this legislature passes every fiscal year. Every month, as the revenues come in, these revenues are recorded by Department of Administration, and through a report, which is the CRER report, they report out that amount. If after the first month, say we're estimating to collect 30 million in revenues for the first month of, say, October, but we collect 40 million. One can say that in the first months of the fiscal year, we have an excess of $40 million at that point in time. Come November, we're estimating to collect another 30 million. We collect another 40 million. So you add the 10 million from October, you take the 10 million from November, and you kind of estimate out for the remaining 10 months of the fiscal year. If we follow that trend, that every month we will collect 10 million over the amount, then conceivably at the end of the year, you can say, oh, we collected 100 or $1.2 million. That's how we categorize the word excess.
Thank you for that, Mr. Steve. So in your estimation, will there be $100,000 in excess general fund revenues for FY23 at the end of this fiscal year come October, late September?
Based on all the information that we've received so far, thus during the Department of Administration, BBMR, and remember, they're the ones that compile and put this report together, the CR report. In their estimate, we are projected to accumulate, as of July 31st, a total of about $16 million by the end of September.
Sorry, Mr. Guerrero, that's not what I asked you. I asked you if we were going to have $100,000 in excess general fund revenues for FY23.
Based on the CER report that came out for the month of July, it is safe to say that of the 16 million they're projecting, I'm sure there's 100,000.
When you say safe to say, because I'm trying to just sort through the debate, and this has been the stance of well, almost half of our colleagues since we started this, but when you say safe to say, like, how safe? What would have to happen?
Well, let me give you a good example. Back in February this year, we were tracking, at the end of the fiscal year, we were supposed to collect $45 million over what we projected. And that was for the month of February. Lo and behold, came the month of March. That amount dropped down to 10 million because we saw a drastic reduction in collections across the board for the government of Guam to collect. So instead of anticipating 45 million for the remaining 8 months of the fiscal year, because what happened in 1 month, that 45 million was adjusted down to 10. And this is where I caution, and we haven't put in the fiscal note, that it's not 45 million that we have in cash. It's 45 million we project to accumulate over the next 8 months. So to your question, is there 100,000? I would bet, based on the projected 16 million the CR is reporting, I would bet a hot dog that we can garner at least 100,000 from that amount.
I'm not a gambler, Mr. Steve, but I like hot dogs. Yeah. So you're basically saying it's good. We're going to have $100,000 in excess revenues to support this amendment.
If you're getting me to say, Senator, that the $100,000
I'm not trying to make you say anything, sir.
Is sure as gold, I will tell you, based on the report as of July, it is safe to say that I think that $100 can materialize by the end of the fiscal year. Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, I support this amendment to the max. And I commend the authors. We're very behind the curve on the vape issue. I know I said this before, but it's the #1 disciplinary offense in the Guam Department of Education public school system. Am I allowed to talk about DOE? So they have seized so many of these vapes that they actually had to call Guam EPA to figure out how do we dispose of these things, because there's hazardous substances in these vape devices. So that's how bad the problem is. I got messages last night from an elementary school teacher that says that the elementary school kids, they're vaping, right? So I want to support, I mean, any effort really to really start tackling this issue, this unchecked issue of the vape. And I've even met with the vape lobby, the vape shop owners, and they know that we're talking about taxes and them paying their fair share coming down. So I see this as part and parcel of a big effort to really tackle kind of this unchecked issue with the vaping, especially among the youth. And so while I understand why some of my colleagues might be hesitant, I'm going to take your word for it. If you're telling me this is not Tatamona money, it's really going to be there, $100,000, $500,000. How about $500,000? What do you think? You said 16 million. Thank you. Okay, I just want to be sure, that's all. Because I'm new at this and I just want to be sure. But so I support this amendment and I humbly ask my colleagues also to support it as well. It's $100,000, $600,000, which is not enough, but a great start. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Excuse me, but where's the 600,000? I only read the amendments 500, so, or 600?
I don't know if I have
Okay.
the right amendment, but I
Okay,
support
okay.
it.
All right. Anyone else like to speak? Senator Blas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, like the good senator from Pago Bay, I have to express my concern with regard to where this money is at and the expectation of when this money is going to be provided. Mr. Guerrero, in the assessment of the CRER, that at the end of the fiscal year, there's going to be about $16 million in excess revenue. Did that take into account already the $20 million owed for the LEAP program?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the last part of your sentence?
Did that take into account already the money that is owed for the LEAP program?
Yes, it did, Senator.
Did that take into account the $20 million that was promised to GDOE?
I presume you're talking about the 20 million for the CIP,
The one
the
that we
maintenance.
yes.
Yeah, the one's fast.
Yeah.
Yes, it did.
Yeah, okay. So it took into account monies that have already been appropriated by this bodies, because we know that we said that they're going to have, but they haven't had any chance to be able to provide it because there's no funding. So before we even consider this $600,000 appropriation, there's priorities, or there's already appropriations that have been before this that have to be basically adjudicated or resolved or appropriated before this money can be provided. Is that correct?
Senator, there have been several laws that have been passed by the legislature, which a few of them did adjust the revenue levels for FY23.
Right.
And I believe that amount totaled roughly about $42
million.
$42 million, yes.
Okay.
And then the other public laws that are still pending to be charged against the FY23 adopted revenues is Public Law 3715 and 3716, which, of course, 15 million is for the LEAD program, and the $10,799,633 is for the GPA credit round 3,
Right.
which amounts to about to 25.8 million dollars. Yes.
Yeah, so would it be very safe to say that while we can anticipate the $16 million in excess, that the anticipation is based on the ability to be able to make sure that those those appropriate funds actually become appropriate or available, right? It's not to you. What I'm trying to get here, Mr. Guerrero, is while this is not actually, it's not phantom cash, but it's cash that is in the back of the line until everything else gets paid. Right?
With respect to the 42 million, Senator Blas, that has already been accounted for in the adjusted FY23 revenues. Okay. What has not been accounted for in terms of pegging it against the FY23 revenues, of course, is Public Law 3715 and 3716. Okay. But if you look at the CER, the way it's presented, it takes into account those two particular appropriations in the sum of about 25.8 million. You subtract it from the current projected year-end total, which is right now about 41.7 million, will give you or yield you a balance of the 16 million I referred to earlier.
Yeah.
So all appropriations made against the FY23 revenue projections have been accounted for up to now.
Yeah, it's just like saying next year I'm going to make $50,000, but then I only come up with, based on everything that I'm going to be doing, but then something happens and bills come and I forget to pay some things, and then you got other bills that come up that are unanticipated that have to be paid for, and those have to be paid before you can. That's why we call it audited. I mean, is it safe to say that the language presented here basically says excess general fund? So the excess general fund is, it's going to be audited. It needs to be audited before it's declared excess.
My understanding, Senator, the way the bill is written and based on the author of the bill, that is the understanding of when this money will be available.
Okay. Okay, well, I mean, just based on that, I would prefer that I would look at this in something that is more realistic in what was already found to be audited, so that there's no guessing at this. And so I appreciate your definition or your clarification of some of the things. It's just that, when we start to spend money in this fashion, it's almost like a hope and a prayer that it happens, and then when it doesn't happen, we say, oh, well, we tried. And I'm not for that. I can't stand for it, man. I can't stand for that kind of conversation, so thank you very much. I am now saying I can't support this amendment. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Blas. Does anyone else like to speak? No, I think we're only left with two other senators. So I'd ask Senator Perez to close on our amendment. I do recognize there's 3 objections. So please, Senator Perez.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So, a lot has been said about, whether the money exists. And, considering that we are in a bonanza period, where mana's falling from the sky almost. We even, just looking at the revenues we've collected in regards to the use tax. We appropriated last term 3.9 million, but we collected 10.4 million, which is roughly about $6 million. So just use tax alone. And, we've been getting excess revenues, which we were able to then subsidize GPAs, the power bills for many of our residents here, not once, but twice. We were able to use those excess funds to reduce the gas tax. We were able to use those excess funds for LEAP, and yet there's still excess funds. So I think the trend is still there. And considering that we are in an epidemic in regards to vaping and nicotine use amongst our youth, I think this is a wise use of money, rather than waiting a lifetime when one develops diseases. And the cost of treatment then is so much more than what we put in today is investing in prevention and education, compliance and monitoring. So the money that we're putting in today is going to save us millions of dollars later on, when eventually we have to treat cancers, heart disease. And if the money is available, which I believe it is, we've appropriated excess funds multiple times. and it's already been accounted for. I say, let's put in this little bit of money to protect our youth. Imagine if this was your child. We know how easily vape is disseminated amongst our schools. At the frustration of administrators and teachers, it's so easy to hide these devices. Imagine if this was your child. Would you want to prevent this from happening to them? I think all of us would. I think many of us would have done something sooner had we had the funds. And I say, let's invest in them, invest in our community. And I ask for my colleagues' support. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Paris. There being 3 objections, please, all in favor of this amendment, please raise your right hand or left hand, whichever hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Amendment fails. We'll now move to the next amendment. Ma'am, coincidentally, you have
Mr.
Senator
Chair?
Fisher.
Yes, sir. I rise to move that the body recess until tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock.
You object? There's a motion to recess until tomorrow. It's almost 5. My colleagues, we are not going to go
Move
beyond
to
5.
bookmark that amendment.
Book what?
Bookmark that amendment.
How? You can't, there's no bookmark on the amendment. We just move on the amendments. It already failed. My colleagues,
The reason I
we'll
am
not-
objecting to a recess, Mr. Chair, is because we were made to submit all of our amendments prior to this chapter, and I think all of those who are here, it's fair for us to go forward with our amendments
But at
instead of
this-
recess. Tomorrow will be a very short session because of we're going to have to recess in order for them to prepare for the state funeral. And so this is the really big chapter of amendments, and we've got a bulk of them on our desk, and instead of reordering them again tomorrow, if we could just go forward.
understood, Madam Speaker. But let's make sure we all understand, we started at 2. We had to figure out everybody's amendment, replacement, rescinding and everything. We lost 2 hours. I'm hoping that when we come back at 9 o'clock tomorrow, unless anybody wants to rule, but there's an objection, I'll ask for the vote that we will recess until tomorrow at 9 o'clock. All in favor of recessing until tomorrow at 9 o'clock, please raise your hand. Okay? As a matter of fact, you know what?
Did it fail, Mr. Chair?
It all failed, but as the chairman, I recess till 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Please have a nice night and please be in order.